Welcome to Storm the Gates, friends. We are your official podcast for the MidTexas Conference of the Global Methodist Church. Your host here, Shay Ryenga.
And I'm Jason Nix, and my eyes are half open. Yesterday...
Authenticity is a value of Brother Jason's, and we're having an authentic moment right now.
We're having an authentic moment. So yesterday, my son turned 6 months old. He's got his bottom two teeth that have come in. He's massive for his size. He's already outgrown like 1 year clothing. But last night, his tummy wasn't feeling good. Didn't really want to sleep. And so I was rocking him and I fell asleep. And we ended up getting about 3 hours in the old rocking recliner, which 3 hours in the rocking recliner, I think equals about 27 minutes of actual sleep, like comparatively.
Yeah,
So, my battery is on empty E, as my mother would say. But we're here. We're doing Storm the Gates. And I will say, even on an empty E, it's good to talk to this crew we talked to today, this team that got back from Bulgaria, this trip, Lauren Green Yates, Lindy Thomas, Will, the one and only, doesn't need a last name. You know him, you love him. But we love this conversation, and I'm going to stop talking because now I'm just like tired rambling. Save me.
Hey, no, I love hearing the stories and the experiences from our friends that have gone there. You know, this is now multiple trips that have been taken in partnership with Bulgaria that started years ago, and getting to see Dr. Daniel Topolsky. You guys have heard him. Faithful listeners of the podcast know who we're talking about. We've had him on the podcast. And he was actually maybe our first little trial run at YouTube. So for those of you that don't know, you can, if you want to watch, you don't have to, but if you want to, we're on YouTube now. And I want to say Dr. Daniel Topolsky was the first.
Yes, he was.
First episode on YouTube. So you can go there.
Riveting content. First YouTube episode. No, like, yeah, why wouldn't you want to go into the catalog, deep catalog cut?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but it was a great conversation. And again, I think if you are just tuning in, or maybe you're just kind of coming on board with what it is to be in the GMC and the MidTexas Conference, we're defining actively as we speak partnership. We're defining the word partnership.
Yeah.
And redefining it in a lot of cases.
And we are pioneering. Credit to Bishop Gregory, Ryan Barnett, and others. I'm sure there's so many. Dr. Daniel Topolsky, and there's probably some other Bulgarian friends I'm not mentioning, and other names that need to be mentioned. But like they're pioneering this definition. Really, they're leading at the front, on the front lines by example. And again, we were one of the early conferences in the U.S., the MidTexas Conference of the Global Methodist Church. Bulgaria was the first around the world, and we were the first in the U.S. And because of that, we're doing some things ahead of some other friends. And I'm sure people beyond me and you could say to the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, trying what hasn't been tried before, doing what hasn't been done before. But I guess from where I sit, I just am very inspired and very encouraged by the vision that's been cast for a partnership, and the actions of going to support, the prayer, the follow through, the trips, in-person relationship that is being fostered, the resources that are being shared, the sustainability that on the flip side, you'll hear, they testify. Dr. Daniel Topolsky is routinely telling their leaders, their pastors in Bulgaria, that this is going to be sustainable. This 5-year window of us supporting, scaling down support over a 5-year period of time will end with them being 100% financially sustainable. So that's his goal as well. And so it's just great to hear that and see that, and, and we're just seeing it. And so, it's just new and fresh, and we're coming off this 4-part ecclesiology series not too long ago. And this is another part of that, like this global Methodist church. We're a global church, and these partnerships are, again, an example of what that means and how we can just be a shining light, a shining example, a city on a hill for our other brothers and sisters in the body of Christ in different traditions. Friends, I think we're doing some stuff that's very, very, very biblical, inspired by the Holy Spirit. that not everybody's doing out there, and then maybe we've been missing some of these pieces.
Well, and so again, I don't know where you're at today as you're hearing this, and I'm going to make some assumptions, some half-tired assumptions. Um, but I would say, and Lauren Green Yates speaks to this, and she speaks to it very boldly, and I'm very proud of her because I like the way she addressed it. Um, but the question might pop in your head: what do we have to learn? Or maybe it doesn't pop in your head; it just sits in our subconscious because we would never be so bold as to actually say, "What do we have to learn?" Well, Lauren Green Yates just unpacks it in this conversation. Um, the Bulgarian Conference of the Global Methodist Church walks in tighter unity than we know in the MidTexas Conference. Let's just call it what it is. Like they go together as a group, um, and in a way that is powerful and honoring to the Lord, and something that we need to look at. Um, and so she calls it the Cowboy spirit, which I'm pretty sure is going to make its way into the title of this episode. Um, but the cowboy way of being cavalier and trying to differentiate yourself, and they don't have that wiring over there, and we need to go and absorb as much of that as we can, because I think our conference will be stronger by the end of it. So I'm hoping that's enough of a tease for you to listen through the whole entirety of this conversation again. We're so grateful for Lindy and for Lauren and for Will, and Jose, even though we had technical difficulties, for jumping on with us, and we hope you enjoy this conversation with a team that just returned from Bulgaria.
All right, we got a big crew today. I feel like for our history so far, Jason, on Storm the Gates, this is at least as big of a crowd of a roundtable conversation that we've had. So
I don't think
it's
we've had
always
one bigger.
exciting.
This is at least matching our biggest
Yeah.
roundtable. So no, it's exciting. You guys are all fresh from Bulgaria, returning back to the States with all sorts of stories, and we can't wait to hear about them. But let's just take a second. Would you just, one at a time, introduce yourself, where you're from, how you're connected in, and we'd just love for people to get to know you.
Well, you can start with me since I'm on the top row here. I'm Lindy Thomas. I'm a longtime member of First Methodist in Carrollton. Have raised my kids there and been there through many changes. It's been good. Um, I am also serving right now as a coordinator of international partnerships for our conference. And one distinction I like to be sure and make is this trip was about international partnership. We have a whole separate area that they're calling themselves Kingdom Advancement right now that is pursuing missions. And missions is taking the gospel to people who don't know the gospel. Our partnerships is partnering with different churches. And obviously, the best way to reach an area and disciple an area is through the churches. So we really hope to strengthen them and let them strengthen us in the process. So it's a real thrill to be involved in this way. Thanks.
I'm Pastor Lauren Green Yates. I'm the pastor at Austin Global Methodist Church, and I'm also the director for prayer for the MidTexas Conference. And as Lindy was saying, we were partnering with Bulgaria. We have been partners with them essentially since we became Global Methodist. Bulgaria was first out the gate. They were the first churches that joined officially the Global Methodist Church. And then right next to them, here comes MidTexas. And so it was a natural kind of partnership. And we've been in good friendship with them and good fellowship with them this whole time. But they're also very passionate about prayer. And so it was great for them to teach us what they have been doing in the area of prayer, and then getting to share with them what we've been doing in the Mid-Texas Conference in the area of prayer. And really, it was a Holy Spirit match. And so we just had such a great time over there sharing what we learned, them blessing us blessing them. It was such a great time over in Bulgaria.
I am Will Gregory. Just finished high school, 18 years old. I am Bishop Leah's son. We just got back from Bulgaria, and I was mainly focused with Rusty on the kids department and hopefully going back next year and doing camps with them. But all I'll say is that Bulgaria is such a bright spot for kids, and they need youth leaders.
Well, our friend Jose Mercado, we were looking forward for him to be with us, but we're going to keep trying. But we may lose his connection again, and if we do, we're going to do our best to have him back on the podcast. But we're going to continue on here. So let me start by asking you all this question. So Bulgaria is not a country that I think the normal, average, everyday American is super familiar with. Depending on everyone's sense of geography and history, world history, what are some things that stood out to you that you learned? Maybe you didn't know a lot about Bulgaria before you went. That you appreciated knowing about their culture, history, the church, the Methodist church there. What were some things just to help paint a picture a little bit and give us a flavor and a sense of Bulgaria, the people and the place, for folks that may not be real familiar with Bulgaria?
Well, one of the things that I learned, obviously, history, most people know that Bulgaria had been part of the communist movement over in Europe. But I did not realize the faithfulness of the Bulgarian churches over there during the communist time. We learned while we were there that essentially only three of the Bulgarian Methodist churches were allowed to stay open during communism. And we actually visited all three of those churches. And the one that I was blessed to preach at, which was Schumann Methodist Church, that was one of the ones that was continuously operating throughout communism. And it was actually a center for Bible smuggling during the communist time. And so they were using this building to bring contraband Bibles. And during this time, their pastor had also been arrested. And the hotel that was right next door, you could kind of peep over. They could keep a good eye on what the goings on of the church. But just the extreme faithfulness of these Christians that were so devoted to the word during a really difficult time. That was something that was new that I learned while I was there. We saw a lot of monuments that were built during the communist time. We got to go to some history museums, and we felt like we got a good grasp on kind of how Bulgaria has always had to fight for its freedom, its independence. It seems like everybody always wanted a piece of Bulgaria, whether it was like the Ottomans or the Turks or the Romans or the Greeks. Everybody was always trying to get a piece of Bulgaria. And so we learned a lot about like the wars that they fought. But it was just, really a great history lesson to learn. Dr. Daniel Topolsky knows everything about Bulgaria. And so does Pastor Svetan as well, too. They were telling us history facts the entire time that we were there. And I felt like I learned a lot about Bulgaria from just being around them.
I was impressed with how aware they are of their own history. Everyone is very knowledgeable, and they'll refer back to when the communists were in charge, when the Ottomans were in charge, or whatever. And they just seem to have a real sense for where they sit in their history. They don't presume things like we can tend to do because we're not quite as connected as far back. Just many monuments, even the keynote at their annual conference by Dr. Topolsky. They were celebrating the 130th anniversary of that church in Schumann, but also he mentioned the 1300-year history of the country because they're in the town that commemorates that as well. So they just have such a feel. One of the groups I was in Varna, the small group that my group divided out into included the pastor and his wife who had reestablished that church after the communists left. And so they really seemed eager to tell their story, maybe instead of doing the prayer time, but we worked on doing both. But it was just exciting, the courage, to just come forward after a long period like that, 40-ish years, and reopen and start again. It was very kind of a privilege to meet him.
Yeah, I was talking with Ryan Barnett, about I couldn't imagine as a nation being the underdog the entire time, like having your history wiped away from you, not be able to have your own story, being a part of the Romans and the Turks and the Soviets, and them trying to wipe away everything, and they come and set up their own stuff here, because everywhere we went, there's at least one Soviet statue that was still up, but no one cared about it. They were all like graffitied on and all this, but they were still there. There's still remnants of all that there. But and then another thing that I was talking to him about was just like youth ministry, because a lot of their churches, most of them are well, not newer, but some of they're like new properties that they have and that they own. And that the difference is, because I spent a few days in Germany too. In Germany, there's not many churches. There's a lot of buildings and a lot of monuments, cathedrals, but they're not operating as true churches. But yet when we go to Bulgaria and they're worshiping over 100 people in these small places, that's what it's truly about. Being in fellowship with one another and just having that time to spend together. But if you go to mass at these giant places, it's it's just so empty feeling, because they're having like 50 people, they're having mass once a day, but it's just so dead and dry in there. But if you go to Bulgaria, where we were at, and actually experience like the mission and the service there, is so fruitful. And it's just, I wish that everyone could just go and just watch that.
So, you mentioned about smaller churches, 100 people. In my understanding, and y'all correct me, but my understanding was, while they are very liturgical, a lot of their worship is actually what many would call like modern worship. And so, we just did a joint service with Varna, and electric drum kit. They led a worship song. I didn't recognize it, but several in our church did, as not a hymn, but just it was an older song. And we heard some clips that came back from the trip there. And I think I remember Daniel saying on his trip here that the old cultural hymns are more tied to the Eastern Orthodox Church, that are kind of baked into the environment there. So what was y'all's experience as y'all worshiped together? Anything that stood out, anything about their style or kind of that made up their services?
Well, one thing across the board is, they celebrate communion every single week. That is a requirement, um, that every church offers communion once a week. Um, I felt like the flow of their service was actually pretty similar to ours. They do a lot of, like, praise and worship songs. We sang Heart of Worship a lot while we were there. Like, every church really loves that song, but we were singing it in both English and Bulgarian, so that was super cool to hear, almost like a concert of voices singing songs where we all kind of knew the tune, but we're singing in English and in Bulgarian. Sometimes we're singing in Spanish too, with the Mercados and some other people that could speak Spanish. So it was really an awesome experience to see. But I would say they're probably liturgical in the sense that they really follow this weekly pattern. It's a pretty predictable pattern. Yet we saw the Spirit move, and there was still space for the Holy Spirit to move, throughout the whole service, and it was really beautiful, but it is a little bit more solemn. It felt the services felt really solemn and sacred, yet joyful and, Holy Spirit filled. So, I know in Schumann, 'cause I worshiped there, we sang songs that I was familiar with, and I tried to sing along in English, and then, of course, I got confused, and so I kept singing the same verse over and over again in English, but, it was great to see how they worship there, and it's also a great reminder that no matter where you are in the world, we're united with by Christ, and so there's a familiarity in a Methodist church, whether it's in Bulgaria or Mexico or the United States, and so that was just great to see in another country.
So I remember when Daniel Topolsky, the last conversation we had with him, his challenge to us, especially in America, was to consider weekly communion. Did they do this? Did they do Holy Communion every service? And if so, was it the same liturgy? or were there different liturgies that they're using?
So we didn't necessarily do communion at the Wall Shakers workshop, although we did communion at the annual conference. We did communion together annual conference, and then all of us did communion on Sunday morning. But I would say we could recognize the liturgy. We knew that it was the regular liturgy, but it was in Bulgarian, and we could tell because the pattern and the phrasing of the words that it's, Christ invites to his table all who, we could tell that's what it was. So that was neat to see.
That's cool. What surprised you? What was one thing that surprised y'all about the church, the Methodist Church in Bulgaria?
So the Orthodox Church there is still like very, very big. Um, so not like the liturgy, but like some of like the styles of the churches were very much based off of Eastern European Orthodox churches. But there was one thing about communion: grape juice is not a thing.
Right.
Oh, and so I didn't know this, but I was supposed to help out with communion and help serve it with my mom at General Conference. Um, but I was at so it's at the very end. Bridget Hines was taking photos, and she's got photos of my face because I was expecting grape juice the whole time. So me and my mom are up at the front giving communion to each other, and then I'm at the very end, and my face is just awful because I was not expecting wine. But I will say, when we went to Varna for Sunday, I was ready and I expected it, and I didn't make a face.
Nice. Do they drink for, even though it's Protestant, is it from the cup? Is it from the common cup
They have
or separate cups? Separate cups, okay.
We did both. Actually, in Varna on Sunday morning, I think for the Americans, they announced that the inner part of the tray was grape juice and the outer part of the tray was wine. So you could take your choice. I think that was just for us.
Hospitality right there.
Right.
Yeah, that's specifically for the Americans in the room. That's cool though. That's super cool. Now, and we got to take communion in our joint service. Daniel Topolsky led us in communion, and there was something. The camera shifted at the end as they were going through the communion line, and there was like my hair stood up because it was like we are partaking of the body and blood on opposite sides of the world, and like, and God's goodness is just pouring out in real time. So so as far as the partnership, sorry, I soapboxed a little bit there. Shay's used to it, so I apologize to you guys. But as far as you traveled through the country, we know it's just, if you can, you can Google pictures or whatever, but are there any stories that came out of your trip that really stood out to you, of someone you met or something that took place, just something that was really meaningful?
I I was a little bit nervous about all of us splitting up on Sunday. So the pastors were all sent to different churches throughout Bulgaria, and we had just got done with annual conference in Schumann, and I was invited to stay behind in Schumann. And at first, I didn't want to. In fact, I wanted Lindy to stay with me, but they had already bought a hotel for her somewhere else, and it was like this whole thing. It would have been a big logistical nightmare to have somebody stay behind, and so I was like, "You know what? I trust the Lord. He's gonna take care of me." And, it was really interesting because it's not that I didn't want to be in Schumann, it's I didn't wanna be there by myself because I realized that the pastor of the church in Schumann, his name is Pastor Nursis. He doesn't, he speaks about as much English as I speak Bulgarian, which is very small, and he actually, Bulgarian is his second language. He's as actually from Armenia, and so, he's just a really neat person, and at first I was like, "How are we gonna communicate? And who's gonna translate for me?" And I started kind of worrying about the logistics of, like, how's Sunday morning gonna work out? Who's gonna translate my sermon? What am I gonna do for dinner tonight? I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen." And so he introduced me to a young man in his congregation, Rudislav that plays the piano, and he speaks very amazing English. We became fast friends. There was a lady that spoke German, and so I communicated with her with very poor kindergarten level German. Um, and we somehow managed to get together. Another lady showed up that was learning English, and so she wanted to practice. We ended up having the best evening meal, having to pause to translate, but everybody was telling jokes, and it was like somehow we just all understood each other and had a great evening meal, and then had a wonderful Sunday service. I got to meet a missionary from Oklahoma to Estonia who had come to Bulgaria for 2 weeks. And her name was Amy, and she was like, "Hi, I'm from Oklahoma." And I was like, "What are you doing here?" And it was just so neat. And what was originally to me kind of something that I was really nervous about, like, how is this going to work out? Of course, the Lord worked out all of the details. And I met some really good friends in Schumann and had a great time. And I just was like, I feel like the whole trip, the motto of the whole trip was "Naya Probleme," which is it is no problem. And that was kind of like the motto of our trip is like, don't worry about the details. They're going to take care of us. The Lord's going to take care of us. It's not a problem. Just go with the flow. And so this trip kind of like forced me to trust the Lord a little bit more, a little bit out of my comfort zone. And because of it, I got to meet some people that maybe otherwise I wouldn't have had a conversation with had I just, stayed in my hotel room, or had I had a group of American people with me. I might have just wanted to talk with them because that's what I was comfortable with. And so it kind of stretched me a little bit, and I ended up having the best time in Schumann. It was great. And we have I'm sure all of us have a lot of different stories from the trip, but I'm actually really, really blessed that I got chosen to stay behind there. I could have gone to another city, but like the Lord knew I needed to be in Schumann that weekend. So that was great.
Will, what about you? Any stories or anything that stood out?
So I met this little boy named Nico. This was at our last Wall Shakers. Lauren did a great job the entire time. But I could probably much teach it by how many times that I heard it within the span of a week, but it was really good. Um, so I'm sitting next to Rusty. He decides to go outside. I'm like, why in the world did he go outside? So I'm there, I'm listening to Pastor Lauren. But then there's just like thought in my head, like, Will, you need to go outside. You need to go outside. It's like, okay. Don't know what that means, but I'm curious. So I go outside, um, and I see Rusty and Ryan playing frisbee with two kids just outside the church. They were just passing by, and they were both part of the youth program there. Um, so we started talking to these two kids, and I look up, and there's about 10 kids now, all from the area. So then I'm starting to talk to all of these different kids, trying to like get to know them. But there's one kid, Nico, that's just like staying by my side. So then I'm talking to Nico. We're bonding over like fishing and sports. Um, and then I ask him like, "Hey, do you know Jesus?" He was like, "A little bit. I know about him." But the gist of the conversation was, I know about Jesus, but I don't have a personal relationship with him. I'm going to these youth events that this church is putting on, but I'm not having that time on my own to myself to spend time with the Lord. Um, and that was very much me as a child. I'm not going to get into the testimony part here because this is all about Bulgaria. But I saw myself in Nico. We bonded over many things, even though he lives 13,000 miles away, or however long it is, 12 hours by plane. Um, but it was kind of astonishing to me. It didn't click in my head that they're just like us. There's no difference. The only barrier is language, and that is it. Because I had to use Google Translate. It took us like 30 minutes to have like a 5-minute talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what I got.
I was also struck with just how much we have in common. as you heard at the annual conference, each church reported on what had gone on in 2024 in their church and then what their prayer needs were. And the prayer needs could be any of our congregations. We all just have the same, the same struggles, the same Lord, though. We also see, how he works. And there's just so much common ground there. I was really struck by that.
So seeing how he works, kind of piggybacking off of Jason's question, if you don't mind sharing, if you want to be vulnerable, if not, that's okay. But just like one of those special ways that you saw the Lord work, like one of those special, a lot of time in Wall Shakers prayer and times of worship, communion, fellowship, frisbee. Like maybe you've already said it already, but were there any just special? Just pick one, like one kind of special moment with the Lord or seeing God work there.
At at Burgess, which was our final Wall Shakers workshop, I don't know about y'all. I think even though Will was outside during the Wall Shakers workshop, which is totally fine because he was making a gospel connection with Nico outside. But, like, the presence of the Holy Spirit was so heavy at that church because they are really doing a lot of good work there, and it's a lot in the Roma community, and, honestly, 'cause, I've worked as a missionary in Mexico, and, it reminded me a lot of, like, the barrios in Mexico, and, the neighborhood kind of looks like it. They do this feeding program, and they have a lot of people who really don't have a lot of what we would call material possessions, but they're hungry for Jesus, and so they're drawn to this church that's also unfinished, by the way. Like, some of the rooms are finished in the church, but a lot of it is like a big concrete building, but they're drawn to this big church in the city, in their city, and what was so great was at the end of the wall shakers, after the material is presented, we all got in groups together to pray. And so one group was just all youth people, Schaefer and Nani. They were all praying over these kids, and they may not have spoken the language, but they were laying hands on these kids. These kids were crying. They didn't know what they were being prayed for, but the kids were receiving these prayers. They were weeping. There was a big group at the back that was all praying together. And then we had a big group in the front. And what was so amazing was that we did have help with some translation, but sometimes they were praying for us in Bulgarian, sometimes we were praying for them in English. But they kept coming forward, at least in our group. Pray for me. I've had a stroke. Pray for me. I have cancer. Lay hand on my knees. I have joint pain. And it was like an unending stream of people saying, pray for me. I need help. I need help. And so we were laying hands, anointing people with oil. And we were just like, it I just remember I was thinking it's never gonna stop. They're just gonna keep asking for prayer because one person got prayed for and they said, "Well, now will you pray for my granddaughter?" And then one person said, I'm discerning a call for ministry." And this was all being, like, relayed to us, and, it was just so amazing. It was like the floodgates were released and the people just kept coming forward to be prayed over. And that was such a special moment. It was like the Lord was just saying, like, people need prayer in every country that you're gonna go
Mm.
to, in every city that you go to. And it doesn't matter if they're Roma or they're American or they're Bulgarian or they're Spanish or anything. People need prayer, and don't be shy about it. Like, say, "Hey, I see you kind of sitting in the corner off by yourself. Can I pray for you?" That happened a couple of times where people were observing, like, on the outside of the circle, and someone would bring them in, and then all of a sudden, they had this huge prayer need that needed to be lifted up. And it was just wonderful to see. That pretty much happened in every single church that we went to, where people were maybe a little shy at first, and then once we got started, it was like we couldn't stop. We could not stop praying for each other.
At our first Wall Shakers workshop in Sofia, I think it was, when we were dismissed for prayer and encouraged to go to the four corners of the room, um, is kind of usually what she would say. So we'd kind of get into smaller groups. One woman just remained in her seat, kind of in the middle of the room, clearly not moving off to be in one of the groups. And so I just kind of sat with her and kind of motioned, like, come on, and she just didn't move. And so I sat down and just by the instructions that Lauren had given, I said, well, can I just pray with you here? And she said, yes. And I said, so who in your church needs prayer? Is there someone we can pray for? And she said, me, I have cancer. And so I said, I've been healed from cancer. Can I pray for you? And she allowed me to pray over her. We prayed together. But then she had really listened to everything that Lauren said in the workshop, because when I finished praying for her, she proceeded to go through all the steps of praying for their pastor, praying for their church, all the things that Lauren had talked about. And I thought, how selfless. She's too concerned about her own health to go join with a group. And yet, after we prayed, her first thought was, okay, I'm going to pray for all the things that I've been taught to pray for here. And it was just a really sweet time. So I continue to pray for Cornelia and Sophia.
My God moment is actually in Pleven, the same night where my mom took the photo and posted it on Facebook that I was sleeping. um, so it was at the very end of the service, where we're in our breakout groups. And I was just sitting next to my parents, so I just stayed there with them. And then my mom says, we're going to go around the room and pray for the person next to you. Look over to my left, and it's my father. Had never prayed over my father before. But I was like the last person to pray. And so I'm going around the room. It's the prayers going around the room. I'm like trying to think of what to say to my father. Like I just don't even have the words. And then before I even say a word, my hands like over his shoulder, like on his head. I have the anointing oil on him. Before I even say a word, I'm just like breaking down into tears because this is such a strong and powerful moment. If you know anything about me, me and my dad are the last two people to ever cry, and we were both just weeping and sobbing. I don't even know if he could hear what I was saying. I hope he could, because I'm probably never going to say it to his face again. I'm just kidding. But I was just such a strong, powerful moment. But if that would have been here in the States, that probably would have never happened. It probably took us going to Bulgaria for us to have that moment. Um, but yeah, that's just the power of God, because that's probably something that needed to happen. So
Yeah, and Bishop Leah did post that picture, and as I was going through the pictures that night, I started crying too, because it's a beautiful picture of Will with his hand on Stan's shoulder. I also just wanna give a shout out to the young people on this trip. Everybody participated. The young people were there to plan for Revive for next year, but they were kind of hostage to the wall shakers situation. They had to participate like everybody else did. And Nani Mercado was on the trip. Schaefer from our church, from Austin Global Methodist Church, he was on the trip. And Will, they were all kind of the younger people on the trip. They all prayed these mighty prayers, and Will even prayed over me. I mean, that's also one of my favorite memories from the trip. It's like we were praying at the wall shakers, but we were also praying for each other all throughout the trip. And, somebody, I even, there's a picture of us praying for somebody on the street. I think Jana Fox wasn't feeling very good one day. So here we are on the streets of Roussay, and we're all just like laying hands on Jana. She's got a guitar strapped to her back. Somebody takes a picture of it. I mean, we just were in a spirit of prayer the entire time that we were on this trip, and it was just so powerful. And like Will said, I don't think we would have gotten that same experience had it just been a regular wall shakers. And don't get me wrong, the wall shakers in America, in Texas, are great. But there was just something powerful. It was like we were all so desperate just to be in the presence of God that we were just praying for each other constantly throughout the trip.
So you've all mentioned the history of Bulgaria, their awareness of their history, their knowledge of their place in history. Would you speak to maybe how that's similar or maybe very dissimilar here? Because I don't know, I'm thinking about it, and I don't know that the church in America, and there's lots of reasons maybe for this. Maybe all the denominations have something to do with this. If we're as aware of church history and our place in it, and
If
and so
if only there was a podcast who would do an ecclesiology series to talk
yeah.
about church history.
Yeah, right? So Yes, that, like, there's 4 parts of an ecclesiology series on a podcast called Storm the Gates. But, how might we benefit as the church in America from kinda knowing our place in history?
We have a lot to learn from churches in countries like Bulgaria, because I think it has historically been easy to be a Christian in America. You know, whether or not you agree with this statement, I'm gonna say it, America was founded on Christianity. They came over on the Mayflower for religious freedom, and then they were pretty much practicing Christians from the time that, people settled in Massachusetts, and then it spread. Methodism came over. It might not have always been the most popular denomination, but we have a lot of denominations. We've got churches on every corner. Um, Other than the pandemic, really, it's been easy to go to church, be the church in America. And because of this, we have like endless variety. You can choose whatever denomination you want to be a part of. And so we have what I would call cowboy enthusiasm in America. We love the Lord. We'll go to church. We'll show out. We'll have a great time. But there's very little. By contrast to a country like Bulgaria, there's very little discipline. It takes great discipline to be a Christian in Bulgaria. It takes great discipline to be a Christian that does not attend an Orthodox church in Bulgaria. So to choose to be a Methodist or any other evangelical denomination in Bulgaria is a conscious choice. I'm going to leave my family's history. I'm going to not be going to the Orthodox church. I'm going to choose on Sunday now to go to an evangelical church like a Methodist church. And my family may not agree with that decision for me, and they may think I'm crazy. Or maybe my family doesn't even go to church anymore. And so it's really strange that I am going to church on a Sunday morning. It costs to be a Christian, even, of course, it costs during the communist times, but it costs to be a Christian in Bulgaria, because that church essentially becomes your family, because you may lose your family if you choose to go to a different denomination over there. Maybe not as drastic in some cities, but there were some testimonies of people saying, I'm the only practicing Christian in my family, or things like that. But one of the things that I think we can really learn, that we learned while we were in Bulgaria, is Dr. Daniel Topolsky promoted a season of national prayer amongst the 24 churches in the Bulgarian conference, where every church was required to take a week of prayer and fasting. And they were required to read the lectionary portions. Everyone was essentially studying the same Bible passages. And then they were praying and fasting throughout the week. They were meeting to pray. They were very purposeful, very intentional with their prayer. And so, like, one week, the church in Pleven would do it. And then the next week, the church in Roussay would do it. And they had essentially, by the time we got there, been on 114 days of just continual prayer as a nation, which each church was taking like a week. And they said, let's not stop, let's keep going. But this idea of this very disciplined approach to prayer, that their conference superintendent could go to them and say, this is what we're going to do, and every church is going to do it, and we're going to be blessed in this process, and we're going to develop a deeper relationship with prayer. And then the MidTexas Conference is going to show up, and they're going to teach us how they've been doing prayer, and we're going to take a little bit from them, and they're going to take a little bit from us. But this idea of being obedient and disciplined is such a contrast, because I started to think, if our conference superintendent, Reverend Dr. Ryan Barnett, sent an email out to every church in the conference to say, all right, we're going to be doing a national, a mid-Texas commitment to prayer, and kicking off is going to be the first church that starts with the letter A, and you're going to be praying and fasting, and then the next church, and we're going to go down the line. To be quite honest, I believe, and this is sad to say, and I would hope this is not true, but there would be some probably churches in our conference that would say, you know what, that week doesn't work for me, or we don't want to do that. We're going to do our own thing. it's like this cowboy independent spirit that I'm seeing. And, while sometimes that's good, um, it's also not good when it comes to the discipline of prayer. Every single church, all 24 churches in Bulgaria submitted to their conference superintendent and submitted to the discipline of prayer. And we got to see the fruits of it while we were there in Bulgaria. And I would love to see something very similar happen in the MidTexas Conference, where we were a little bit more willing to be obedient and submissive to our leaders, to the wisdom that they have to share about prayer. And so I'm going to be working on something similar, at least in our area. What would it look like if district by district, because our districts are large, we have 10 churches in our district. What if for 10 weeks every single church in my district decided to do something like what they were doing in Bulgaria? What would that look like? And of course, we'd have to get everybody on board, and that's really hard because we've got this idea, I think, sometimes in the American church, that church rises and falls with what I want to preach on Sunday morning. If I don't want to mess my sermon series up, or that kind of thing. And I think there's something that we can learn from Bulgaria about unity and discipline and purposefulness, that really kind of stands in contrast to our especially cowboy culture that we have here in Texas. We're great. We've got some really great things going for us in the MidTexas Conference, but I think we've got a lot to learn from the discipline of prayer from the Bulgarian Conference.
Something that impressed me about Daniel Topolsky too is he has respect for the Orthodox Church, and you won't hear him talk badly about them. He'll talk about what we can learn from them, so he has respect because I think he sees that all as part of their history, and where they are in that long history is just this brief stage. And so we're not going to, and just like Will mentioned, where they even have their communist statues still up and things like that, they don't get rid of all that. They're like, this is part of who we are. It's played into who we are. And yet we are going to serve the Lord in this way. And just kind of, this is one reason I've enjoyed I'll give your series on ecclesiology a plug, just to hear with respect. We often look at our history at the church before somehow as getting it wrong, and so we are getting it right. And we need to kind of get over that thinking and look at what has fed into what we know and who we are today. And I think you see that a lot in that culture, both just in their cultural things, but also in the church as well.
Yeah, I just want to add on to everything that y'all are saying. For me, like one of those benefits of history and knowing our place in it is the unity that y'all are speaking to. For me, anyway, just looking at it, just the continuity, starting to see the vision of Jesus's prayer in the Gospel of John for us to be one, as he and the Father are one. And I'm starting to see that. I see different traditions that we listen to. Some of us here listen to the Remnant Radio podcast and love what those guys are doing. And those are reformed, charismatic guys. One of which is more of Lutheran than he is reformed. And yet they kind of just recently had a conversation about communion and how they've totally like flipped from their upbringing on looking at what communion is and talking about real presence and kind of getting into the weeds on the differences of real presence positions on communion, distinguishing that from transubstantiation in the Catholic Church. So looking at the sacraments and bringing back Daniel Topolsky again and his word for us to practice communion consistently. Because when, again, you look at church history, what does church history do? What's the practice of the earliest Christians all throughout history? What do we have in common more often than not? It is the practice of communion, or what we believe is happening in communion, what communion means, symbolizes as a means of grace for us to bring us into unity with Christ and with each other. And so it's like that. And history helps us learn that and realize that. And I think you're right to the cowboy spirit that you're referencing there, Lauren, too. In the States, it's just we can still be so siloed from each other in that individualistic American cowboy spirit that we bring into our denomination. And so I see hope in us coming together. And I know it's a lot of our hearts to do more together as one church. And so I know I'm just constantly dreaming and praying to the Lord, how can we do that here in Irving, Texas? What are some of the ways that we can embody that unity together, knowing that we all have our schedules and jobs and families and issues in our own particular specific contexts?
Well, and I think if you guys have been tracking with us for a while, we're coming up on about a year that we've been doing this, and I think in July that Storm the Gates has been rolling out. And one of our earliest podcasts was with our Bulgarian partners and Bulgarian teams, and this group that had just gone over. That was the initial kind of like, what is this going to look like? And we began to kind of bang the drum as the MidTexas Conference of being partners and not understanding mission and connection different than we had before. And I think a lot of people responded to that. But I think even this second trip, I didn't know that Revive was setting up shop to go over there. I love that. I love that Wall Shakers got to go through. I love that Daniel Topolsky was here for our annual conference again this year. We're at the tip of the iceberg for everything that the Lord wants to do as he begins to sew our churches together. And I think, Lauren, you said it, and you probably said it more directly and boldly than even I would be comfortable, but you're right. If there was a mandate that was given, I'm not sure how much of us in Mid-Texas would take it seriously. Or if we did it right up to the point that it meant that we were going to have to do things differently than the way we like to do them. And things would look different and sound different and feel different. And that's a real thing. And I don't say that I'm not trying to be a downer. I think the quicker that we go, hey, that lives in me, because it lives in me. Like, I like things the way I like them. And, but if we're going to really partner effectively, like fully, then, and I said it to my church, and I don't know if they'll ever forgive me, but like, our preferences don't matter. And as a matter of fact, my preferences should be the first thing I lay down in order to make room for something that is outside of it. So that's, again, soapbox numero dos for Jason over here. As we're kind of wrapping up the conversation with some of those thoughts, do y'all have any tips, any tricks? Lindy, I know you are the tip of the spear for us in the MidTexas Conference, for being connected not only with Bulgaria, but also with Costa Rica and our other international partnerships. Churches, pastors, laity that are hearing this, and they're like, you know what? I think they're talking about me. We don't have any connection with these other parts of the Global Methodist Church. Set us straight. What's a good first step?
Well, as a result of this trip, we really were looking at what can we do to connect. And one thing that makes it challenging, I love that your church worshiped with the church over there, but each church there is connected with the whole district here. So they may have 8 or 10 churches. So we can't ask them to be on Zoom at odd times with all of those churches and to do, all of those things. So we have to really look creatively. And one thing that we pretty much were in agreement on as we came home was we need to take teams of people from a district representing the different churches to go and just be in the community, worship with them, get to know them in their church and in their neighborhood. And so we're going to start that next summer, hopefully. And we'd love to see more of that going forward, where people would get a chance to see a little bit of the country, maybe not quite the tour that we got, but to really focus on the community that they're connected with. So that's going to be coming, and be looking for communication on that, because we would really love to do that. Maybe even stay in homes. We'll just have to work out all the logistics, but that's what we'd like to see happen.
So I know that, Resurrection, our covenant area, no longer called covenant area, our district, is connected, I think, with I think it's Burgos, or is that how you say it? Burgos?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we would have a team from our district all go over and stay in that part, maybe not go from Varna to Sofia and back. That would be, I'm just giving you my
You're in?
My endorsement, I'm in. That sounds fun. I'm 6'8". I don't travel well. So, uh, the more legs of the journey, man, but I'd love to get over there and just get to know those folks. That'd be incredible.
If y'all can't speak to this, that's okay. What are the aspirations around finances? So as we have Costa Rica partnership with doing specific mission work, our partnership with Bulgaria, our partnership with Rwanda, can any of you speak to sort of the aspirations of the conference around, financing these? Like, again, that's such a good word, Will, like the needing to be embodied in-person relationship there. What with more trips that are on the horizon and taking districts that go to these countries, is that something that we're gonna take as a matter of the budget in Mid-Texas? Is that something that, districts are gonna be charged with maybe doing some fundraising, local churches or individuals, are gonna need to raise those funds? Can you speak to any of that, or is it just all things on the table, just creatively trying to discern a, sustainable way for us to keep these trips going?
The conference is not paying for people to go. And our financial arrangements with these countries, we are helping Bulgaria for a 5-year period because they were left behind significant funding. They very courageously left behind significant funding. So what we're doing is trying to help. This is also the case with Rwanda. Help them, but make it very temporary and make them, make it to where they're working towards self-sufficiency. So that's the goal. Now, with the trips, it will be up to an individual to find their funding, but that can be through church fundraising, offerings, whatever, scholarshiping youth or even adults. And so, as with so many things with the Global Methodist Church, we really would like for that to all be kind of managed at the church level and the individual level rather than the conference level.
Let's get a bucket and a mop or a bucket and a rag and have a church car wash. That's what I say.
There you go.
That might
And, also the funding that we are sending over to Rwanda and to Bulgaria, when it goes with the relationship, it's a whole different thing from just blind check writing year in and year out. Daniel Topolsky is very determined that they are going to be self-sufficient at the end of the 5-year period. We're not sure, but he's just very determined, and he lets his pastors know what he expects. And so, because we're face to face, they appreciate. They're so grateful. They're so appreciative, but they don't want it to go on either. So it's really kind of lovely when it goes with a relationship.
Well, friends, thank you so much for your presence with us. Shout out to Jose Mercado. We love you, brother, and we'll have him back on the podcast. We had some technical difficulties there. So you listening to this, may or may not know that he was part of this conversation at one point for a little bit, but he was for a little bit. And so sometimes that happens. But wow, just so refreshing and so encouraging. And I have to say, like in my life and ministry, I am just in awe of God's provision, the inspiration to start a partnership like this. Obviously, just moved by this, like the testimony that y'all shared, the courage of Bulgaria to do what they did when they did it, and then this Mid-Texas partnership with Bulgaria and the commitment. I mean, I've just seen consistency in the words that are said and the actions to back them up. Now with multiple trips and the coming and going with different key leaders here and there, it's just a beautiful thing to see. And it gives me a lot of hope for us living into, again, the ecclesiology series that we just did, trying to do it right? Trying to do the best we can to live out, the vision that we see in Scripture, the word of the Lord that is the church, that the way it's described, and just trying to do that well as best we can as sinful, fallen human beings. So I'm encouraged. Y'all are just, inspiring me, and I know, and Jason. And so thank you for taking the time to share with us. Again, a little housekeeping. If someone wants to inquire and know more, Lindy Thomas, is it Lindy Thomas at midtexasgmc.org? All right. And then Wall Shakers, of course, Lauren Green Yates at midtexasgmc.org. So, friends, if you want to know when the next Wall Shakers is, the conference website's a great resource to check out the schedule, the calendar of things on the calendar of the conference website. That's a great way. Reach out to Lauren, reach out to Lindy to ask questions. Will so excited for you taking the next step, going to college, and all that the Lord has for you as He's called you to be a pastor in the church or fulfill your calling. And if I've spoken out of school and Nate and put pastor on you, I didn't mean to, but I know you're called to ministry, and so whatever that looks like, we're excited for that too. And so, thank you all so much. Thank you for listening to Storm the Gates. We hope you leave us a 5-star rating, subscribe and follow us, share it around if this podcast blessed you. We'd love to connect with you. You can find us online at stgpod.com. You can email us at stgpod@midtexasgmc.org. You can also connect with us via YouTube. We're video now, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, and Apple. We hope you stay up to date on all that God is doing as we share testimonies of His powerful work in the MidTexas Conference of the Global Methodist Church. Remember, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Storm the gates.
So when you said mandate, I was like,
Yeah.
it's out there.
And I do shy away from that because I don't, like Will said, you don't want it to be like a dictator, and that's not what, and Dr. Topolsky is by no means a dictator.
Yeah.
He's cool as a cucumber, but it's just, that was the thing. I was like, I really started to think, like if we were told like this is what we're gonna do, I can think of several churches that would be like, I'm not doing that.
So
it demonstrates leadership in a really impressive way.
Mm-hmm.
I've moved so far in this area, and so you say the word mandate. I actually appreciate it, Lauren, because like where I'm spinning, I keep circling around communion. So I apologize. I could get annoyed with that, but like I think I'm ready for the bishops to say, "Here's your liturgy for communion. This is what we're doing." I think
And
I'm
do it every week.
I'm ready for that. I really am. I'm kind of waiting for it because I feel like we don't have a book of worship yet. I know that's in the works. We're going to talk to Tesha Mallory about that. I know she's on a team that's part of doing that for the church. And because that's knowing our theology of communion, to me, I'm having a hard time in light of having these ecclesiology conversations. Like, I think we need to kind of do the same thing together every week.
Yeah, it's okay to be in uniform, especially on something as essential as this wonderful means of grace that we've been given by Christ, to do in remembrance of Him. And the more that we do it, as John Wesley says, you can never take too much of this medicine.
Thank you for listening to Storm the Gates. Please leave us a 5-star rating, subscribe, and follow us so you can stay up to date with all the amazing work God is doing in the MidTexas Conference of the Global Methodist Church. You can connect with us directly at stgpod@midtexasgmc.org, Facebook, Instagram, and share with your friends. You can listen online at stgpod.com in addition to the Apple Podcasts and Spotify platforms. Remember, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Storm the gates.